Right, grab your morning brew because we've got ourselves a proper political tempest brewing, and it's serving up controversy with a side of statistics that'll make your head spin faster than a washing machine on the fritz. Welcome back to UK Daily Coffee, where we serve up the political chaos while it's still steaming hot. So Reform UK has decided to throw down the gauntlet with what they're calling the next big issue in British politics, and spoiler alert, it's about as subtle as a brick through a window. Sarah Pochin and her merry band of Reform politicians have just held a press conference that's got Westminster clutching its pearls harder than your gran at a jumble sale. Now, before we dive into this political minefield, let me just say, we're about to discuss some seriously contentious claims here, so buckle up buttercup, because this ride's about to get bumpier than a pothole-riddled B-road in rural Yorkshire. The Reform crew, led by MP Sarah Pochin, who snatched Runcorn and Helsby in May like a seagull nicking your chips, has made some eyebrow-raising claims about small boat arrivals and women's safety. And when I say eyebrow-raising, I mean they've practically launched into orbit. They're arguing that migrants from predominantly Muslim countries are putting UK women at risk of sexual assault and rape. Yes, you heard that right, they went there, with all the subtlety of a foghorn at 3 a.m. But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean politically explosive. Reform isn't just making vague gestures toward public safety, they're drawing direct lines between immigration, religion, and crime statistics. It's like watching someone play Jenga with dynamite. You know something's about to go boom, you just don't know when. Pochin threw out some numbers that'll make your calculator weep. Apparently, foreigners are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for sex offences than British suspects when you account for population numbers. Now, that's a statistic that deserves unpacking like a holiday suitcase, because statistics without context are about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The thing is, Reform's essentially doing what no other major party wants to touch with a 10-foot pole dipped in political sanitizer. They're making connections between nationality, religion, and crime that have the Westminster establishment reaching for their smelling salts faster than Victorian ladies at a particularly scandalous opera. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the Reform politician at the podium. Because this isn't just about immigration policy, this is about Reform trying to carve out their own political territory with a machete made of controversy. They're positioning themselves as the party willing to say what others won't, consequences be damned. And speaking of consequences, Labour's already firing back faster than a tennis ball at Wimbledon. They're pointing out that Reform MPs voted against the Crime and Policing Bill, you know, the one that's supposed to tackle violence against women and girls. It's like complaining about the weather while voting against umbrella funding. The irony is thicker than custard at a school dinner. Now, let's zoom out from the political ping-pong for a hot minute and look at what's really happening here. Reform is making a calculated bet that there's a chunk of the electorate who feel like the mainstream parties are tiptoeing around issues they want addressed head-on. It's political risk-taking at its most brazen, like doing a wheelie on a motorbike while blindfolded. The numbers game gets even more interesting when you look at Reform's polling trajectory. They've gone from political minnows to potential kingmakers faster than you can say opinion poll. We're talking about 27% voter support, that's more than Labour's 21%. If politics were a horse race, Reform would be galloping toward the finish line while everyone else is still saddling up. But here's the kicker, traditionally, Reform has struggled with female voters like a dad trying to understand TikTok. At the last election, only 12% of women backed them compared to 17% of men. Now they're trying to flip that script by positioning themselves as the protectors of women's safety. It's a political pivot sharper than a figure skater on black ice. The strategy is clear as crystal. Reform is betting that concerns about women's safety will trump traditional party loyalties. They're essentially saying, look, while everyone else is dancing around the issues with politically correct ballet shoes, we're wearing steel-toed boots and we're not afraid to use them. Dame Andrea Jenkins, who's now Reform's mayor of Greater Lincolnshire, isn't pulling any punches either. She's talking about thought police monitoring social media while letting paedophiles off the hook. It's the kind of soundbite designed to make your average voter spit out their tea and demand answers. She's painting a picture of a Britain where the wrong priorities are getting attention, where mean tweets get more police attention than actual crimes. The invasion language isn't accidental either, it's designed to trigger an emotional response faster than a smoke alarm in a student kitchen. When you call something an invasion, you're not just talking about policy disagreements, you're talking about existential threats. It's the difference between saying we have a problem and we're under attack. Linden Kemkaran, Reform's leader of Kent County Council, doubled down by talking about biological men pretending to be women because apparently they decided to throw trans rights into this political cocktail for good measure. It's like they looked at one controversial topic and thought, you know what this needs? More controversy. The timing of this isn't coincidental either. With over 25,000 migrants crossing the channel so far this year, Reform is essentially saying, while you're all arguing about the economy and the NHS, here's an issue that's literally arriving on our shores daily. It's political opportunism disguised as public safety advocacy. What's fascinating is how Reform is trying to own the narrative completely. They're not just criticizing government policy, they're reframing the entire debate around women's safety. It's like changing the rules of football mid-match and insisting everyone else adapt. Bold? Absolutely. Risky? You bet your political career it is. The really clever bit, and I use clever in the most politically Machiavellian sense possible, is how they're positioning this as protecting British values. They're not just anti-immigration, they're pro-women's rights, pro-safety, pro-British culture. It's political rebranding at its most sophisticated, like putting premium packaging on controversial content. But let's not forget the human element in all this political theatre. Behind every statistic, every soundbite, every heated exchange, there are real people with real concerns. Some genuinely worried about safety, others feeling unheard by mainstream politics, and many just trying to make sense of a world that seems to be changing faster than fashion trends. The question everyone's asking is whether Reform can maintain this momentum without imploding under the weight of their own controversial statements. It's like watching someone juggle flaming torches while walking a tightrope, impressive if they pull it off, spectacular if they don't. Nigel Farage, notably absent from this particular press conference but endorsing it from the sidelines like a puppet master working the strings, claims this is the next big issue. And you know what? He might not be wrong. Not because the issues aren't complex, they absolutely are, but because Reform has managed to do what opposition parties dream of, they've forced everyone else to respond to their agenda. Labour's response about Reform voting against their crime and policing bill is textbook political counterpunching. It's the equivalent of saying, if you really cared about this issue, you'd have supported our solution. But it also reveals something interesting: Labour feels threatened enough by Reform's positioning to hit back immediately. The polling numbers tell their own story too. When Reform is outpacing the governing party in the polls, you know something seismic is happening in British politics. We're not just talking about a protest vote anymore, we're talking about a genuine reshaping of the political landscape. What makes this particularly spicy is how Reform is essentially betting that voters care more about immediate safety concerns than long-term policy nuance. It's politics distilled to its most basic emotional level: fear, protection, us versus them. Whether that's cynical manipulation or legitimate concern depends entirely on your political perspective. The Conservative Party must be watching this with the same expression as someone watching their ex succeed with their former best friend. Reform is eating into their traditional territory while simultaneously appealing to voters the Tories have struggled to reach. It's political evolution in real time, and it's brutal to watch. But here's the million-pound question that nobody's asking loud enough: what happens if Reform's gamble pays off? What happens if concern about women's safety becomes the defining issue of the next election cycle? Because if that happens, every other party is going to have to scramble to catch up faster than commuters chasing the last train home. The beauty of Reform's strategy, and I mean beauty in the most coldly calculated political sense, is that it's almost impossible to argue against without sounding like you don't care about women's safety. It's political positioning that would make a chess grandmaster weep with envy. So where does this leave us, the bewildered British public, trying to navigate this political minefield while juggling mortgages, energy bills, and the general chaos of modern life? Well, it leaves us with more questions than answers, and frankly, that might be exactly what Reform wants. Because confused voters often become angry voters, and angry voters are the ones most likely to demand change, any change, even if that change comes wrapped in controversy and tied up with inflammatory rhetoric. The real test will be whether reform can sustain this momentum without combusting under scrutiny. Because while controversial statements get attention, governing requires more than sound bites and statistics. It requires actual solutions, real policies, and the kind of nuanced thinking that doesn't always fit neatly into press conference proclamations. But for now, reform has successfully shifted the conversation, forced their opponents onto the back foot, and positioned themselves as the party willing to discuss the undiscussable. Whether that's political genius or political suicide remains to be seen, but one thing's certain, British politics just got a whole lot more interesting. And there you have it, another day, another political bombshell in the ever-entertaining circus that is UK politics. If you've made it this far without needing a strong cup of tea and a lie-down, you're doing better than most Westminster veterans. What do you think about reform's latest political gambit? Are they brave truth-tellers or dangerous demagogues? Let me know in the comments below, and don't worry, I read every single one, even the ones that make me question my life choices. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because with the way British politics is going, we'll probably have 3 more scandals before tea time. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your coffee stronger.